The lawyer unfolded the second envelope with shaking hands, his voice trembling as he read my mother's final words. "The will you heard is a lie." My brother went pale, his wife lunged, and then 2 officers stepped forward with handcuffs. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Mr. Hensley's fingers trembled, not with age, but with the weight of what he was about to unfold. His hands, normally steady from years of probate routine, now hesitated just slightly as they pulled the flap of the envelope open. The paper inside made a whispering sound as it slid free, yet it cut through the silence like a blade. Clark shifted, trying to laugh again, but it didn't land. His voice caught at the edge of uncertainty. The arrogance he wore like armor began to crack in places, too small to notice if you weren't looking, but I was. I had been looking for years. I could see it now. The vein twitching along his jaw, Pamela's grip tightening on his forearm, the slight tremble in her manicured fingers. She was calculating, rerouting, rewriting in real time whatever narrative she had prepared herself to live in. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she had no script. The rest of the room was frozen in collective suspension. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade were suddenly alert, leaning forward like spectators at a magic show where someone's hand might get cut off. My Aunt Edna clutched her pearls like a prop, her eyes darting between Clark and me, desperate to see which way the wind would shift. No one cared about truth. They cared about outcome. Even the air felt charged, heavy with what hadn't yet been said. I could feel my own heartbeat in my palms. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't afraid. I had lived in the shadow of that fireplace, the shadow of Clark's expectations, Pamela's jabs, and my mother's silence. I had been prepared for the erasure. What I wasn't prepared for was that final envelope. And neither was Clark. Mr. Hensley adjusted his glasses with a slow, deliberate motion. He didn't speak right away. He just scanned the page once, then again. When he finally looked up, it wasn't at Clark. It was at me. His gaze held something unfamiliar, something quiet and reverent. Then he looked back at the paper, cleared his throat a second time, and said carefully, "These are the words of Margaret Hartwell, written in her own hand." Another hush, but this one was different. It wasn't polite, it wasn't rehearsed. It was fear and recognition, because everyone in that room suddenly realized whatever came next wasn't going to follow the script. Clark didn't speak, not at first. His jaw twitched as if his body were trying to decide whether to shout or run. The veneer of control he'd worn so confidently just moments ago peeled away in real time, exposing something raw, almost childlike in its panic. He stared at Mr. Hensley as though he could will the words back into the envelope, like paper and ink might retreat from truth if glared at long enough. Pamela's voice, sharp and shrill, sliced through the chaos. "This is some kind of setup. She was sick. She didn't know what she was doing." Mr. Hensley turned toward her slowly. His eyes didn't hold anger, just finality. "I have copies of the medical evaluations," he said. "Margaret Hartwell was declared of sound mind by 2 independent physicians. The will was witnessed, recorded, and certified by the probate court 3 weeks before her passing. I was there." The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was violated. It was the silence of a room whose illusions had been yanked out by the roots, still quivering in midair. A silence that knew it could never return to the comfortable performance it had rehearsed. Clark's breath became audible, shallow, staggered. He turned his head just enough to look at me, no longer from above, but across. For the first time in decades, we were level, and beneath that was something worse than anger. It was recognition. The unspoken understanding that the game he'd spent years rigging had unraveled in seconds. One of the officers, tall with the stillness of someone used to tense rooms, stepped forward and addressed Clark in a low, clear voice. "Mr. Hartwell, I need you to stay seated while we collect some statements." Clark opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. Only breath. Pamela, now pale, reached for her purse as though clutching it might keep reality at bay. But she didn't leave. She knew the optics. Leaving would be guilt. Staying was strategy. Her eyes darted, scanning for any remaining leverage, but there was none. Not here. Not anymore. I stood still, my heart pounding, not from triumph, but from something deeper, something like gravity. Justice doesn't arrive with drums or fire. It steps in, softly, and rearranges the room. Mr. Hensley set the letter down. His voice, now firm and unwavering, filled the silence. "The estate belongs to Michael Hartwell. That is final." And for the first time, the silence felt clean. The air inside the house felt different, heavier, as though the walls themselves had been holding their breath, waiting for a truth to be acknowledged. The hardwood floors, the oil paintings, the heirloom rugs, nothing had moved, but everything had shifted. I wasn't here on borrowed time anymore. My name, once absent from the hearth of this house, now echoed in its bones. The staff moved quietly, respectfully. There were no hollow greetings, no forced pleasantries. The gardener, Raoul, who used to nod with eyes trained downward, now met mine directly. It wasn't just politeness. It was recognition. Recognition of something that had been hidden, denied, and finally set right. In the study, dust still lined the edges of the antique desk. The chair where Mom used to sit creaked familiarly as I sank into it. It was upholstered in a worn navy fabric, the kind you don't replace out of practicality but sentiment. Her scent, vanilla and old paper, still lingered faintly in the cushions. I opened the drawer with care, almost afraid the moment would vanish if I moved too quickly. That's when I saw it. A thin, leather-bound journal pressed flat beneath a stack of photos. The journal was weathered, its spine cracked like dried earth, its pages soft from years of turning. Her handwriting, slanted, sharp, unmistakably hers, met me on the first page like a whisper from beyond. "Clark's taken over my prescriptions. He says the doctor changed the dosage, but I never saw a new bottle. My vision's getting worse. I don't remember the last time I saw Michael. Pamela won't let me answer the door anymore. She says I need rest, but I feel more like I'm being kept." Each page pulled me deeper into her world. A world I hadn't known had collapsed from the inside out. I read about her fears, her doubts, her slow realization that love had become a transaction in the hands of the wrong son. Michael brings books and flowers. He listens. Clark brings lawyers and silence. I was wrong before. I won't be again. That line broke something in me. Not because it absolved me, but because it proved she had seen me all along, even when I wasn't being chosen, even when I was standing outside the gates of this family, waiting for acknowledgement. The rage I'd buried surfaced with the grief, tangled together like old roots, impossible to pull apart. I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest. The house was silent. But this time, the silence didn't accuse me. It welcomed me home. The halls carried a different kind of silence now. Not the suffocating hush of secrets, but the stillness that follows a storm. The kind that settles only when the air is finally cleared, even if the damage remains. I walked them daily, barefoot on the cold wood floors, listening to how the place breathed. There were no more slammed doors, no whispered arguments behind antique glass, no clink of wine glasses raised in smug celebration. Just space, honest space. The trial had burned through headlines for a week, But in court, justice had moved fast. The evidence had been undeniable. Clark's own voice on the tapes, barking orders at house staff, threatening a nurse with legal action if she let me in. Bank records showed forged authorizations, midnight fund transfers, names of shell corporations tied back to Clark's personal accounts. His lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity. It was a poor performance. Clark pled guilty before the second recess. Pamela vanished like smoke. No forwarding address, no apology, not even a text. Just gone. I didn't look for her. I spent the weeks that followed moving room by room through the house. Not changing things, not erasing the past, but reclaiming it. I removed the locked liquor cabinet Clark used to hide his shame. I opened the curtains in rooms that hadn't seen daylight in years. I pulled up the thick rugs and let the hardwood breathe. Some of the floorboards creaked like they were exhaling after holding back too long. The guest wing became something else entirely. I had it repainted in soft earth tones, installed skylights, added beds that didn't look like hospital cots. I called it Margaret's Wing. It felt like the right penance, for her and for me. We'd both been voiceless in our own ways. It was time someone else felt safe here. The girl came on a rainy morning, hair wet, shoes muddy. Her voice was soft, her presence hesitant. I recognized the eyes before she spoke. Her mother had been the nurse who risked everything by testifying. She handed me a small envelope and said, "She told me to give you this when it was all over." The handwriting was shaky, the paper thin. "Because of you, I wasn't afraid to speak." I stood on the porch long after she left, the rain soaking through my sleeves. That note weighed less than an ounce, but I felt it settle somewhere in me like an anchor. Not a burden, a root. That was the real inheritance, not the deeds or the bank accounts, the permission to speak, the power to be heard.